Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this Explore Analytics webinar. We'll go ahead and get started now. We're going to be talking about how to avoid some common ServiceNow reporting pitfalls using Explore Analytics. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Explore Analytics. I used to work at ServiceNow. I've been working in the IT service management space for quite some time now, and I've seen some patterns that folks fall into when they're trying to deliver IT service management reports or other reports in an IT service management context. So we're going to talk a little bit about those challenges, and we're going to look at using Explore Analytics, how we've solved some of those issues in the past. Obviously, there's a number of different roadblocks you might run into in your time running reports for ServiceNow. So this will, I think, be a great place to start the conversation, but I'd be happy to go deeper into some of your reporting pitfalls one-on-one if there's some interest there. If there's questions that come up, you can use the Zoom chat function, and I'd be happy to answer them towards the end of the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean about avoiding those pitfalls and how we're solving problems. One thing I really want to talk about is not just solving reporting issues, but doing it in a sustainable way. I think for folks who are familiar with ServiceNow, especially folks who've been using it for a while, you know that there's often a lot of different ways to tackle things. But when I look at how we're solving reporting solutions, we want to do it in a sustainable way. What do I mean by that? I mean, you want to do it you want to have a reporting solution, to solve this or that report without requiring a lot of manual work. I've worked at organizations where, before they started using Explore Analytics, they had, say, a monthly IT service management report that was, compiled, let's say, 3 hours a week to put together a PowerPoint deck of slides to email around. And what that meant was that there were folks within the organization who once a week or once a month were spending hours and hours compiling the same reports over and over again. What that means is that you have an upper limit on how many reports you can design and create, because the reports you do create, you have to spend time on. We also want to do this without copying data. So one of the great powers of ServiceNow, as well as some of the other data sources you have in your environment, is that you have this rich, constantly evolving set of data. And anytime your reporting solution involves copying that data out, so downloading it into an Excel sheet or downloading it into a data warehouse, what you're often going to see is that the data starts to become out of date, it becomes conflicting, and you wind up spending about as much time on setting up the copying of the data around as you were doing, actually trying to get the report itself. It adds a whole extra layer of administration. On that same level, we want sustainable reporting solutions that don't require writing custom code on ServiceNow and without administrative changes to ServiceNow. Now, a lot of folks say, part of the reason that we've brought ServiceNow in is the fact that there is so much you can do with code and administrative changes. And I've seen some high quality reports that you can generate by writing a whole layer of JavaScript or downloading a library of charts or, all these different ways of tackling it. But it creates two incredible barriers. One is that means that your reports are now going to have to go through a change control process. Right? Anytime you want to change how you're gathering that data or slicing and dicing it, you're actually going to need to test it and get approval, and it might clash with other code changes, and it brings in a whole level of risk that really should be unnecessary for building reports. The other component is that it greatly reduces the amount of people who can actually generate these reports, and it creates a reporting bottleneck. Because now, in order for, say, the hardware manager to answer some questions about his assets, he needs to reach out to the ServiceNow administrative team, and we have to work out a solution together, and it's going to be part of the general roadmap of, all the integrations and workflows and everything. So again, when we're talking about avoiding these pitfalls and moving towards some sustainable solutions, the bar we want to hold our reporting solutions to is that we're not going to do manual work, copying data, writing code, or making changes to ServiceNow. So everything I show today is going to avoid all four of these pitfalls. So because of that, we're not going to talk about data warehousing or pulling data out of ServiceNow. That's a way that involves a lot of all of those areas, code and manual work and copying data around, that often creates a very centralized bottleneck, right? You may have these going on in your organization today, and there may be reasons for the kind of global business intelligence why this is necessary. But when it comes to the day-to-day IT service management and IT service operations, this whole data warehousing process is going to be too inflexible to really meet your needs. And what that usually means is that when the manager asks for the data, we give them a whole mess of spreadsheets. This is the way that we paper over a lot of the limitations and a lot of the pitfalls that we run into is by generating those spreadsheets. And it's dangerous because there's a lot that you can do, but it is manual and it does require copying that data around. So today we're going to take a look at some of the common use cases that we see, but we're going to tackle them using Explore Analytics. Explore Analytics is an integrated reporting solution for ServiceNow and can reach into other sources of data as well, both for real-time dashboards that you can build on or reports you can build on the fly or KPIs that you want to measure over time. And from the beginning, Explore Analytics was architected from that perspective of no code, no administrative changes, no manual work, and no copying data. The data stays in place. So now that I've talked a little bit about the approach and how we're going to avoid those pitfalls, I want to talk about some specific examples of those pitfalls and show how you can really get a lot of value out of using a solution that avoids manual work and custom code and all of that. So let's start with the number one pitfall that I see in a reporting space, which is not even about reports you can't deliver, but reports that you're delivering in a way that's not very scalable or sustainable, which is building too many reports when you don't really need to. So this is a slightly exaggerated, but not very exaggerated example of what I see all the time in IT service management organizations. They say, okay, we need to report on service level performance. So, okay, we're going to create one report for service level in the Americas, one report for EMEA, and one for Asia Pac. Oh, and we also need to break that down by P1, P2, and P3 SLA delivery. And pretty soon, in order for you to generate your weekly or monthly report, there's actually 20 or 30 reports that you're generating and refreshing. I see this all the time in a PowerPoint or in a PDF that you need to assemble. And it seems like you're delivering the information people are asking for in a very quick way. But the reason that I consider this to be a pitfall is because once someone decides that they want to make a change, each change is going to lead to 20 or 30 changes, right? Just deciding, oh, we're going to change how we calculate service level performance means you have to go and make sure that each one of these charts is built correctly and is working in the same way. So now I'm going to leave my PowerPoint and take a look at Explore Analytics, and we're going to see an example that's very similar to this, but where we're actually going to do this in a much more scalable and sustainable way. So if you see this report right here, you'll recognize it because it's the same report that was in that deck. But rather than having 20 or 30 reports that are all showing the same information, what I have here is a set of interactive controls that'll give me a lot more options. So if I select that I want the P1, right, it's going to update that report and give me the P1 information. And then even within that, I can select a particular assignment group, say the chat support, and it's going to slice that data even further. In addition to these slicers, there's other interactive controls that I'm giving my users here. I can actually slide in to zoom into a subset of that data, or I could, from the top menu, say, well, just show me the year to date, or show me 2 years, or the full set of the data. The reason of this is that every one of those changes that I'm allowing the user to make is a second report I don't have to generate. I can also give them drill down paths. So if I click, I could go into a version of this report that's broken down by company or broken down by CI class. So I'm giving them a lot of reports. I can also give them the ability to change how it looks. If I decide that I actually just want to see a line chart of the achieved percent, and in this case, forecasted into the future, I didn't have to build each one of these reports individually. From my perspective, this is just one report to maintain. But in terms of how many static reports would replace it, I actually did a little calculation on the back of a napkin. And I found that if you multiply all the different slicer options together, the different time spans, the drill downs, and being able to filter based on subsets of the data, this actually contains 76 million different types of reports. I'm not exaggerating. I ran the math on that several times because I was very amused. So this ability to give these interactive capabilities means that you're going to have to build a lot less reports. So that's, I would say, the number one pitfall that you can really save a lot of time in your organization is take a look at, where do I have a deck like this where we're presenting the same piece of information 10, 15 different ways, and how can I give the user who's viewing that report the ability to change things and view things the way that they need to. That, again, also ties back to that concept of bottleneck. It's going to be a lot more sustainable if the users can navigate the data themselves rather than having to reach out to you, because almost always the first thing when you show a report to an executive or to a manager is they're going to say, actually, can I see the data by, can I see it for the last 2 years instead of the last year? And, oh, how does this compare between the two different geographies that we are organized by? So again, when you're thinking about your organization, think about how you can have those interactive controls that give you a lot of depth of reporting. So now let's talk about another common challenge, which is tailoring to the audience. A lot of the time when you build reports in tool, you're going to be presenting things in the concepts and in the structures of the way that the tool present things. And I'll show an example. But the number one I use is, what's a configuration item? If you're using ServiceNow, there's a field called configuration item, and it makes perfect sense to the people who are using ServiceNow from day to day and are working inside the tool. But when you're presenting that report, you don't want to show things in those kinds of terms to people who may not actually be as aware of that. So what you want to be able to do when you're presenting reports is do it in such a way where without having to make changes to ServiceNow, you can present things in ways that make sense to the user. And with Explore Analytics, we have a lot of controls that really give you that ability to do so. So this is an example I worked on a client, which was the question that was presented was, how many incidents are handled internally versus externally? So this is a report that I pulled against the ServiceNow incident table to break it down by internal versus external. But there was a fairly significant hurdle, which was that there was no checkbox in ServiceNow that identified whether it had been handled internally versus externally. Now, if you're a ServiceNow administrator, your mind may have leapt to, well, let's create that field and populate that data. And that's certainly possible. But sometimes when you're reporting, you want to get that information now. You don't want to have to go through a change control process. And you don't want to clutter up ServiceNow with a bunch of fields that maybe are only relevant for a couple reports. So instead, what we did in Explore Analytics is that we created this mapping function. So it's similar to a function in Excel that in real time looks at the company field. And if it contains Acme, then we know it was handled internally. And if it didn't, it was handled externally. So what that did was it created this virtual column called external that I could then build a report on top of that allows me to break it down by internal versus external. So it allows the person who's building this report to effectively report on fields that don't exist in the data without you having to make a change to ServiceNow. And that's what I mean about sustainable reporting. We want to make those changes without impacting ServiceNow. Now you'll notice that in this report, it's actually identifying this as a count. But even just the simplest ways of making sure that things make sense to your viewer, I'm going to relabel that to be called number of incidents. So that, again, we're being very clear to the user how many were handled internally versus how many were handled externally. I might even go and add a subtitle to this to say how many incidents were handled internal via external. You want to make sure that when you're building these reports, you're thinking about the person who's viewing them and how they're going to be able to understand the data that you're presenting. So again, when I was talking about that configuration item field, in this report, it happens to be that we're reporting on hardware incidents by the age of the device. So we're walking onto the associated CI and grouping it into buckets of CIs that are 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and 10 plus years. But in this case, because we're doing it in the context of a hardware device, I relabeled it in Explore Analytics to be, age of device, rather than, if you can see here, what ServiceNow calls it, which is configuration item.installed. So with Explore Analytics, in the specific reports, you can change the way that you're presenting that information to the user, and it doesn't impact, say, another report that's more of a change management, which is looking at it by server type. So again, now the same field is being relabeled to be server type. It's a very common reason where people either wind up compromising with reports that are difficult for the audience to understand, or where I've seen people pull data into Excel purely so that they can have control over those kinds of labels and identifiers. And then the last challenge that we're going to talk about is scattered data. So often with ServiceNow, you might have within ServiceNow a lot of different pieces of information. So for example, project management is a huge place where I see this. You have time cards, resource plans, allocations, project tasks, user information, all that might touch on information about your project within ServiceNow. And then there might be information that's sitting in spreadsheets and access databases, or it might be in a call system and a monitoring system. So this is where almost immediately people turn to spreadsheets, or they turn to copying data into a data warehouse. But I set us a pretty high bar. I said we didn't want to have manual work, we didn't want to have code. So let's take a look at an example of how we can combine this data together without any administrative impact whatsoever. The first that we're going to look at is going to be from an example inside project management, which is combining some of those data from tables together. So I'm going to pull open my project management dashboard, and I'm going to take a look at this resource allocation plan versus actual. Now, if I take a look at this, what this is what we call in Explore Analytics a mashup, where we're combining two different reports from two different tables. So I created one report on the time card table called actual hours, and another report on the resource allocation table called resource hours. And I've combined them together into this resource allocation. And I can say, show me just the top 10, so it's a little easier to read. But then not only did I combine the allocated hours with the actual hours, I've added here a calculation that subtracts them so I can see the variance. Now, one important thing to understand about this is that often this kind of a calculation within ServiceNow, you would need to do some sort of a JavaScript or save that information to a table. With Explore Analytics, again, we're doing it without code and without making any changes. There's no database view you need to create to support this. But the real power of the Explore Analytics mashup is that it actually isn't restricted to data that's purely within ServiceNow. So ServiceNow, in this case, this is a report I've built that's against my ServiceNow production instance with the incident table. And I have another timeline that's against a relational database, a call system. So this could be, for example, Cisco or Avaya. Now, if I go and I say, I'd like to create a new mashup view, I'm going to take those two different reports that I've created. One is the calls from the call system. The other is incidents from my incident management system, ServiceNow, and we call it call post incident for the webinar. Now I have one report. It's reaching in real time to two different systems of data without having to copy any of that data out of those systems. And I have here one timeline that's showing both of them. And as we saw before, I could say, well, give me the ratio of incidents to calls so I can see what that call conversion rate is. So this is just a sample of some of those use cases that we've touched on with customers. And there's many, many that we could go into, and I'd be happy to answer more questions. But the real reason that I wanted to come back to that is that, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can solve reporting challenges when you come into, whether it's how you're laying things out so that your users are seeing things in the way that they expected so that they're able to slice and dice the data, or whether it's on the back end with that calculation and combining data. But regardless, what I hope you take away from this webinar is as you go to look at the way you're doing reporting against service management data today, are you doing that reporting without manual work that you're repeating week after week? Are you doing it without copying data from data source to data source, creating duplicates and having to worry about integrations and headache? Are you doing it without writing custom code for ServiceNow, or without requiring database views or table changes that have to go through a change management process? If you'd like to find out more about Explore Analytics, I'd be happy to answer those questions. If anyone has questions right now, you can use the chat feature that's within the Zoom meeting. You can find it in the menu. I'd be happy to answer any questions. You also can respond back to the invite that brought you to this meeting if you'd like to schedule a time to go deeper in and take a look at your specific reporting challenges. Great. So there was a question about how do you create the drill down paths. Um, the way that drill down paths are defined, and let me pull open, let's say this thing. Defining a drill down path is incredibly easy. When I'm looking at a report, I can go to this pencil icon and select drill down path. And then you can define, all right, one path I want to give to the user is to be able to go from the assignment group to the assigned to of the incidents. And then for another, let's say, we'll just have a drill down to category and subcategory. So again, this is, just the person who's creating that report is able to create those drill down paths. And then this drill down path will be available when you publish the dashboard in ServiceNow if you're publishing it in a context that requires the user to log in. And I'm happy to follow up to the person who answered that question if there's further questions. And then there was another question that came, which is just to take a look at some of those dashboards. So this was an example dashboard that I worked on with a client around the service level agreements. And another question actually that just came in is to talk about what we have in terms of pre-built reports. So we have two options of pre-built report packages. One is called our IT service management analytical application. That covers a lot of the core IT service management processes, incident, problem, change. And I'm going to show it actually in ServiceNow. So the IT service management has a number of different dashboards that cover things like being able to do long-term root cause analysis on problems, or being able to take a look at what we call end user demand, the combination of incidents and requests. So all of that is in the IT service management analytical app. It's a package of pre-built reports around those processes. And then we also have a project management, the dashboard that I showed before, the project status dashboard. That's another pre-built suite of reports for project and resource management that we also have available. Because I agree that sometimes the person who asked the question said that sometimes users don't know what they want. So we do provide those kinds of reports for folks who are interested in getting a quick start in that area. Great. Another question that was asked is about how easy it is to connect this to ServiceNow. So if you want to use Explore Analytics with your ServiceNow environment, as an administrator, I go and I say I'd like to add a new data source. If you're familiar with ServiceNow's update sets, it's just an XML file that you can drop into ServiceNow that holds the pre-built integration. You basically just download that. You provide us with your with a read-only credential that'll allow us to connect to your ServiceNow environment. And then we'll discover what tables and fields, including custom tables and fields, are available to report against. So the setup process, we had a Fortune 5 company that was live in production within the first hour of using Explore Analytics. It's a very quick process to get started. Great. Last call on any questions? Great. Thank you all for coming and joining us today. As I said, my name is Guy Edwab. I'm the person who sent the invite. And if you have any further questions, or if you'd like to set up a time to go deeper into some of the use cases, I'd be very happy to do that. Just reach out and let us know. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.